The salt air stung his face as Lieutenant Commander Jake Rourke stepped off the landing craft and onto the private naval facility off the coast of Virginia. A stiff Atlantic breeze cut through his uniform, but he didn't flinch. His focus was locked on the training field ahead, a stretch of beach cordoned off by fencing, surrounded by watchtowers and camouflaged tents. This wasn't a battlefield, but it was close enough. This was where war dogs were born, more precisely, where sea combat dogs were forged. It was an experimental program, codenamed Project Neptune Fang, and Jake had just been appointed its lead trainer. German Shepherds had long been used in military and police operations, known for their intelligence, courage, and loyalty. But training one to operate in the chaos of sea-based missions, fast-moving water, boats under fire, shipboard infiltration, that was something else entirely. The Navy had only recently approved live combat simulations on water, and Jake's job was to create the first K-9 unit specialized for maritime operations. Not just scent detection or bite work. This dog would need to jump from helicopters into surf, board vessels, navigate narrow corridors on unstable decks, and stay laser-focused amid the roar of engines and gunfire. It was the kind of mission that most humans struggle to complete. Now, Jake needed to find a dog who could do it without fear. The first group arrived that afternoon, 6 highly bred and pre-screened German Shepherds flown in from different military breeders around the country. Each one had a record of excellence in traditional obedience and preliminary tactical assessments. Jake stood silently as the handlers brought them out one by one, letting them acclimate to the new environment. The dogs barked, sniffed, paced. One of them lunged at a seagull. Another growled at the surf. But then came the last one. A large male with deep amber eyes, an all-black coat, and a posture that seemed carved from stone. He didn't bark or twitch. He simply scanned the horizon, sitting calmly as the wind rippled through his fur. Jake raised a brow and checked his clipboard. Name, he asked the handler. Ghost, the handler replied. 3 years old. Former Special Forces K-9 candidate. Too aggressive for civilian adoption, too focused for patrol work. Jake knelt down, holding Ghost's gaze. You've seen some things, haven't you? Or he murmured. Ghost tilted his head slightly, then returned his attention to the crashing surf. Jake didn't need to see more. He'd found his candidate. The next day marked the beginning of what would be a brutal testing process, not just for Ghost, but for Jake too. Training a dog for sea combat required building a new language between man and animal. Jake started with acclimation drills. Ghost was introduced to the sights and sounds of naval operations. Roaring jet skis, engine thrums, water cannons, and loudspeaker commands. Some dogs cowered. Some barked in panic. Ghost stood firm. But Jake noticed subtle tension in the dog's muscles, slight stiffness in his tail. He's holding it in, Jake noted in his log. But the stress is there. We need to make the sea his home, not his enemy. So Jake began what he called wet zone conditioning. Ghost was brought to the shore each morning and made to walk knee-deep into the surf. Jake joined him, fully suited, splashing side by side. At first, Ghost resisted the waves, especially when they broke near his head. Jake didn't force him. He used positive reinforcement, treats, commands, and consistent body language. After 4 days, Ghost stopped bracing for every wave. On day 6, he dove into the water on command for the first time, retrieving a floating bite sleeve as if it were a trophy. He's beginning to trust the water, Jake recorded in his notes. That's the first breakthrough. But sea combat wasn't just about swimming, it was about speed, stability, and obedience under chaos. Jake constructed a floating obstacle course using anchored platforms, makeshift ladders, and even a mock-up speedboat. Ghost was tasked with leaping from platform to platform, weaving through narrow spaces, and crawling under rotating arms, all while drenched and off balance. He slipped, failed, and even fell into the water multiple times. But he didn't give up. Jake watched with growing admiration as Ghost learned from each mistake. He adjusted his pace, learned to time his leaps with the sway of the water, and, most impressively, began to anticipate Jake's nonverbal cues. The most critical test of Chapter 1 came with halo drop simulation, a 20-foot dive from a raised platform into open water, mimicking a helicopter insertion. Jake knew this was make or break. Many dogs would freeze at the height. Some would jump but panic upon hitting the waves. Ghost paced the platform the first time, ears pinned back, gaze locked on the blue below. Jake stood at the edge, clipped in with a line, and called, "Ghost! Here!" The dog hesitated, then ran. His body arced gracefully through the air and hit the water with a splash. Jake dove in after him, surfacing to find Ghost already paddling toward the target buoy. Jake's heart swelled. Ghost wasn't just ready, he was born for this. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson, Jake sat beside Ghost on the dock, both of them dripping wet and silent. Ghost leaned slightly against him, panting softly. Jake placed a hand on his back and whispered, "You're not just a good dog. You're a soldier." Chapter 1 had ended. Ghost had passed every initial test. But Jake knew the real battle was only beginning. Because in the next phase, they'd leave training simulations behind and enter live combat drills aboard active ships. A world where one wrong move could cost lives. And Ghost would have to be perfect. The USS Ridgeline loomed against the steel-grey sky like a floating fortress, its deck bustling with activity. Jake stood beside Ghost at the dock, both dressed and geared for the next stage in their journey. The German Shepherd was calm but alert, eyes fixed on the massive vessel ahead. It was the first time Ghost would be on a real Navy destroyer, not a simulated platform, not a floating training rig, but a live military ship with crew, operations, and live drills underway. This was the heart of sea combat, and Ghost would be trained in the middle of it. The Ridgeline's XO had been skeptical about hosting a dog on deck. "This isn't a zoo, Commander," he had grumbled. But Jake had pushed hard. "If we want dogs that can perform under real mission stress, they have to train where the stress is real." The captain had finally agreed on one condition. No distractions, no risks to crew safety, and the dog must obey as tightly as a seal under fire. Jake had nodded, confident. Ghost was ready. Or at least, he would be. The first test was deck acclimation. The Ridgeline surface was a maze of equipment, slick with salt water, and constantly vibrating from the engine room below. Most dogs would have slipped, panicked, or shut down. But not Ghost. He moved with purpose, adapting quickly to the uneven metal beneath his paws. Jake guided him around spinning radar domes, under hanging cables, and through the deafening roar of chopper blades warming up nearby. The wind whipped violently, tugging at Ghost's fur and ears. His instincts wanted him to crouch and flee, but every time Jake gave a hand signal, Ghost responded. Sit. Stay. Move. Crawl. No hesitation. By day 2, they began live fire familiarization. A .50 caliber machine gun erupted from the port side in a drill, its echo shaking the ship like thunder. Sailors covered their ears, and even the hardened crew flinched at the noise. Ghost tensed. His ears folded back, his tail dropped slightly, but he didn't run. Jake knelt beside him, whispering calmly, hand resting on his neck. They had practiced simulated gunfire with blanks and recorded tracks, but nothing compared to real rounds being unloaded on a moving ship. Jake tossed a metal bite dummy across the deck. Fetch! Ghost bolted through the chaos, retrieved the dummy, and returned without a single misstep. It wasn't perfection, but it was loyalty under fire. The next week was packed with combat navigation drills. Ghost had to memorize a route through the ship's narrow lower decks, from the command center to the engine room, using scent and spatial awareness. The corridors were tight, some barely wide enough for a grown man and a dog side by side. Lights flickered. Metal groaned. Men rushed past him in every direction. But Ghost kept pace, guided by hand signals, touch, and subtle vocal cues. Jake didn't need a leash anymore. Ghost responded as if he could read his mind. Jake introduced high-pressure simulations. One involved a smoke grenade flooding a hallway with haze while sirens blared. Another featured a hostile intruder planted in the officer's mess. In each case, Ghost's mission was the same: follow commands, isolate the threat, and await a takedown cue. During the intruder drill, a Navy SEAL acting as an aggressor shouted, overturned a table, and pretended to lunge at Jake. Ghost stood poised, vibrating with energy but unmoving until Jake gave a firm strike. Instantly, Ghost lunged, locked onto the padded arm of the aggressor, and took him down with terrifying precision. When Jake shouted, "Out!" Ghost released immediately and returned to heel position. The SEAL took off his helmet, laughing breathlessly. "That dog's got more discipline than half my men." Yet even as progress surged, Jake knew the most dangerous phase still lay ahead: waterborne boarding missions. These operations mimicked scenarios where Ghost would need to jump from a moving craft onto enemy vessels, assist in detaining hostile targets, and provide real-time tactical support, all while the sea tossed them like rag dolls. They trained on RHIBs, rigid-hull inflatable boats, the Navy's go-to for fast, shallow-water insertions. Ghost was fitted with a reinforced float vest and a microcomms unit under his collar, allowing Jake to give commands remotely. Their drills began at low speed, practicing entry and exit on calm waters. Ghost was hesitant at first. The bouncing, the noise, the ocean spray, it was chaos incarnate. But Jake was patient, rewarding every small win. A successful jump onto a target boat. A quiet sit beneath a pounding motor. A steady hold while waves smashed against their hull. By week 3, they increased the speed and unpredictability. The RHIB would charge toward a mock vessel, and at Jake's signal, Ghost would leap, board, and perform crowd control. Jake watched him in awe, the Black Shepherd vaulting like a missile, landing firm, moving room to room with quiet precision. They fitted Ghost with a special GoPro cam for observation and studied his footage each night. His instincts were nearly perfect. He checked corners, scanned for threats, even paused near heat signatures behind doors. One evening, after a 12-hour drill cycle, Jake sat beside Ghost on the ridgeline stern. The sea stretched endlessly around them. Jake could feel the exhaustion in his bones, but also pride. Ghost rested his head on Jake's boot, calm despite the vibration of the engines and the buzz of a returning chopper overhead. Jake took a deep breath. "You're not just trained now," he said softly. "You're combat ready." And he was. Ghost had passed every test with minimal error. He could navigate the ship, respond to over 50 hand signals, remain calm under live gunfire, and board hostile craft at full speed. He had been transformed from a raw, aggressive candidate into a disciplined sea warrior. But Jake knew they weren't finished yet. Combat training wasn't just about drills. It was about the moment when simulation ended, and life was truly on the line. Chapter 2 closed with Jake receiving a confidential folder from Naval Command. Inside was their first live mission assignment. Coordinates. Objective. Risk level, red. Jake looked at Ghost. Time to find out if all this training was enough. The sky was pitch black over the Arabian Sea when the mission began. A crescent moon hung low on the horizon, its dim light barely reflecting off the churning waves below. Aboard the USS Ridgeline, the atmosphere was tense but focused. This wasn't a drill. This was real. Jake stood in the RHIB's launch bay, tightening the last strap on Ghost's flotation vest. His heartbeat matched the drone of the ship's engines. Nearby, the SEAL team prepped silently, loading non-lethal weapons, rappelling gear, and surveillance tech. The operation was classified under the code name Sea Phantom, a high-risk interdiction on a vessel suspected of trafficking stolen military-grade electronics. Hostile resistance was likely. Intelligence hinted at ex-military mercenaries on board. The target ship was fast, nimble, and armed. Ghost sat silently beside Jake, alert but calm, like a coiled spring. His eyes didn't blink as the RHIB lowered into the water. This moment, leaping into the unknown with nothing but training and trust, was everything they had worked for. "Let's go," Jake whispered. The team climbed down the ropes and dropped into the boat. As the RHIB roared across the sea at 40 knots, Jake knelt beside Ghost and gave him a final scan. Comm synced. Vest secured. Camera live. He looked into Ghost's eyes. This time, it's real. You with me? Ghost gave a single, silent nod, not literal, but something in his posture answered. He was ready. The target vessel, the Dagger Star, appeared on radar 12 nautical miles out. Through the binoculars, Jake could make out the faint outline of its dark hull slicing through the water. The plan was to approach from the starboard side, launch a dual-entry boarding, and detain the crew. Ghost's role was critical. He would be the first on deck to sweep the forward quarters and distract if resistance was met. The RHIB throttled back within 200 meters, cutting speed. The wind picked up, and waves crashed against the hull. Jake signaled. Ghost rose, poised on the edge of the boat. His body was tense, eyes locked onto the target vessel. Go! With a bound, Ghost soared into the darkness and landed with a heavy thud on the target ship's wet deck. Seconds later, Jake and the SEALs followed by rope. The Dagger Star's crew was already reacting. A muffled shout rang out, followed by footsteps. Ghost didn't wait. He followed his route instinctively, weaving through crates, ducking under ropes, heading straight toward the forward quarters. A man with a pistol rounded the corner. Ghost lunged and clamped onto the man's forearm with brutal precision. The gun clattered to the deck. Before the man could scream, a SEAL arrived, zip-tied him, and pulled Ghost off without command. No injury, no confusion. Just a clean takedown. Jake moved fast through the ship's midsection, watching the feed from Ghost's body cam on a small wrist-mounted screen. The Shepherd had already cleared 2 compartments. Another crew member tried to flee below deck, but Ghost, sensing movement, cut him off and held him at bay with a low growl until Jake arrived. One by one, resistance crumbled under Ghost's precise execution. The element of surprise wasn't just human, it was canine. But the mission wasn't done. Below deck, in the cargo hold, Jake found something chilling. Crates, dozens of them. All stamped with military serials and barcodes. Some were open. Inside, encrypted radios, night vision scopes, and other black market tech. And something worse, crude blueprints showing how they'd planned to retrofit drones with stolen comms units. The men aboard weren't just thieves, they were contractors for a growing terrorist cell. This wasn't an average takedown. This was a spark in a larger fire. Just then, a radio call came in. Contact. Port stern. We've got movement, one crew member trying to escape in the lifeboat. Jake and Ghost ran back toward the top deck. The sea wind howled louder now, and waves smashed against the side of the vessel. Jake spotted the man in a red vest untying the emergency raft. Ghost, block, he shouted. The Shepherd leapt into action, sprinting across the deck and barking fiercely, cutting off the man's exit. The would-be escapee froze, panicked, and threw his hands up. Jake reached them seconds later, breath ragged, adrenaline surging. Good boy, he gasped, gripping Ghost's vest. You saved it again. The mission wrapped at dawn. The Dagger Star was secured and towed. All 5 crew members detained. No fatalities. No shots fired. Ghost's record was flawless. As the RHIB pulled away from the now quiet ship, Jake sat back, drenched in sweat and salt, with Ghost lying by his side. Around them, the ocean stretched in every direction. The horizon glowed with first light, orange and gold breaking through stormy clouds. One SEAL looked at Ghost and muttered, "That dog's not just a unit. He's an asset." Back on the ridgeline, Jake debriefed with high command. The footage from Ghost's camera was reviewed in silence, officers watching, eyes wide, as the dog moved with near-human intelligence through chaos. One admiral turned to Jake and said, "This changes everything. If we can build a unit around this standard, we can redefine naval special operations." Jake only nodded. He didn't need medals or press. His reward was already sitting at his feet, wagging his tail faintly, eyes sleepy but alert. Later, Jake brought Ghost to the bow of the ship. The wind had calmed. The ocean, once wild, was still again. Jake leaned down, wrapping an arm around the dog's neck. "You were trained for war," he whispered. "But you fought like a brother." Ghost nudged his head under Jake's chin and let out a soft, content huff. The mission was done. The experiment had succeeded. But more importantly, the bond had been sealed, forged not just by commands and repetition, but by trust in the fire of real danger. Ghost wasn't just a German shepherd anymore. He was a sea combat canine, the first of his kind. And this was only the beginning.